Released in November 1994, Live at the BBC was the first Beatles album since Let It Be to include previously unreleased songs. The album marked the beginning of a new era for the Beatles and their fans, and laid the foundations for the Anthology project and beyond. I'm Andrew from Parlogram Auctions, and in this video we'll look at the stories behind this album and what went into creating perhaps their most important archive release. One of the most exciting afternoons I can remember as a teenage Beatles fan was tuning into BBC Radio 1 on Sunday, March the 7th, 1982, and listening to a programme called The Beatles At The Beeb. This 2-hour programme celebrated the 20th anniversary of the Beatles' first appearance on BBC Radio and consisted of performances and interviews, all of which I'd never heard before. The tape I made of that programme that afternoon became one of my most listened to tapes over the next few years. I learnt to play all the songs on the guitar and could recite all the speech and interviews by heart. So why had I never heard any of this BBC material before? Well, at that point in my life, I was spending all my money on collecting the regular releases, and finding bootlegs wasn't easy back then. It's not like you could pick them up on a Saturday morning in Woolworths. But unbeknown to me, the BBC sessions had at that point been in circulation unofficially for over 10 years. They'd first appeared on a bootleg album called Yellow Matter Custard in September 1971, which consisted of 14 tracks taken from 6 1963 editions of Pop Go the Beatles. During the following decade, it was issued multiple times, on many different formats, labels, and colours. It was just the first in a series of unofficial albums to utilise BBC material, which became a common sight of record fairs over the next 20 years. These records delighted, frustrated, and confused Beatles collectors, as they were sometimes sold as EMI studio outtakes, and the quality of the sound on them was only average at best. The Beatles at the Beeb radio show proved to be so popular that not only was it repeated that December, but a revised and expanded edition was broadcast, albeit 3 years later, in November 1985. Another great thing about these programmes and the publicity generated by them was that it led to the discovery of yet more lost recordings. This resulted in a more comprehensive series called The Beeb's Lost Beatles Tapes, which was broadcast as 14 half-hour episodes in 1988, again on BBC Radio 1. And it was at this point that EMI's eyes lit up. So in 1989, they began preparing an official Live at the BBC album. But although they had a large selection of tapes to choose from, they judged that many of them simply weren't of good enough quality for release. And that, coupled with the ongoing complicated negotiations with Apple, slowed the whole process down. Meanwhile, the BBC producer in charge of the original project, Kevin Howlett, began an earnest search for additional and better quality tapes. The BBC, like many other broadcasters in the 1960s, viewed pop music as ephemeral and therefore expendable, and made little or no effort to preserve it in their radio or TV archive. This short-sighted attitude, along with pressure to save money on tape and storage space, led to the wholesale wiping of programmes containing pop music, which in the BBC's case didn't end until 1978. So it was a miracle then that somehow some tapes survived. This was thanks mostly to people who'd worked at the BBC, such as one of the show's original producers, Bernie Andrews, who John Lennon jokingly accused of bootlegging in his final BBC interview with Andy Peebles. As well as using bootlegs as a source, it was a stroke of pure luck which brought the project its finest recordings. Although home video recording in the early to mid-60s was years away from becoming available to the general public, home audio recording had taken off in a big way. The boom in portable reel-to-reel tape recorders in the early 1960s meant that some teenagers found themselves with access to their father's machines and could record their favourite music from their friends' records or from the radio. Now, if you look at the credits in the back of the CD booklet, or indeed the album, you'll see that the first name listed is not, as you would expect, someone like Mark Lewison, but a lady named Margaret Ashworth. As a young Beatles fan back in 1962, she'd commandeered her father's Philips reel-to-reel tape recorder, on which he used to record easy listening programmes from the radio. Instead of using the low-quality crystal microphone, which was usually supplied with these machines, her father had connected the recorder to a line output of the radio, which resulted in excellent quality recordings. Unlike the crackle and fade of the Radio Luxembourg signal, which was broadcast on the medium wave, The BBC Light programme, on which Pop Go the Beatles was broadcast, used the more stable, better quality long-wave frequency. So during the summer of 1963, on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. to be exact, Margaret recorded 11 of the 15 editions of Pop Go the Beatles onto 5 and 7-inch reels of tape. And even though these recordings were made at 3 3/4 inches per second, the sound quality was excellent. Over the years, I've been lucky enough myself to find similar recordings of these shows on reel-to-reel tapes, but they've always included just tantalising snippets of these shows, as the person recording them switched the tape on and off to suit their own taste. The most important thing about Margaret's recordings were that they were of the complete shows. So not only have you got the Beatles performances and all the speech elements, but you've got performances by other groups too. Fast forward to 1992, and Margaret had forgotten all about the tapes, until the subject came up in a conversation with the editor of the UK TV listings magazine Radio Times, who in turn mentioned them to one of their columnists, a man named Mark Lewison. Fortunately, the tapes had survived the years intact in her parents' attic and were in playable condition. Upon closer examination, they were found not only to contain editions of Pop Go the Beatles, but included the Beatles' performances on 2 editions of Saturday Club, the December 1963 edition of From Us to You, Non-Stop Pop from July 1963, which included the Beatles' Pop Chat section, 2 editions of The Public Ear featuring George and Ringo, and 2 pristine editions of Side by Side featuring Jerry and the Pacemakers. Kevin Howlett likened the discovery of Margaret's tapes to finding Tutankhamun's tomb. A few months later, to her surprise, Margaret found herself sitting in room 22 at Abbey Road alongside sound engineer Alan Rouse. He was very impressed with the quality of the tapes and recommended them for use in the BBC project. Abbey Road then made 7 sets of CDs containing the complete editions of Pop Go the Beatles and gave 1 set to Margaret to keep. However, sometime later, when Margaret wanted to share her recordings of the shows on her website, her request to do so was denied by the BBC. They told her that nothing she had was missing from their archives and that she shouldn't upload any of them to any site or else. This kind of attitude is one of the reasons which puts off collectors returning lost material to the BBC, and until that changes, we're all missing out on some incredible material. As there'd been very little official Beatles-related activity since the release of Past Masters 6 years earlier in October 1988, news of a new Beatles album naturally caught the interest of the press. But unlike today, where Paul and Ringo are happy to talk about a new Beatles release, neither they or George contributed anything to the promotion of the Live at the BBC album. It was clear that everybody was nervous and unsure about how the public would react to these archive recordings. Paul actually spent the day of release filming a 30-second ad for the Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts, which would open the following year. In the ad, he appeared cross-dressed as a headmaster, Shakespearean actor, and a streetwise modern painter. A link to that on YouTube is in the description. Instead, the press wheeled out some of the usual suspects, such as DJ Alan Freeman and Ray Coleman, to ask them if it was a boring piece of nostalgia or fresh proof of their genius. Don't forget, this was pre-Anthology, and the success of this album, or lack of it, was crucial to that project. But they needn't have worried. It may come as a surprise for some young folks, but standing in line outside shops at midnight was a thing before the iPhone was invented. This group of excited and young-looking Beatles fans were photographed outside Tower Records in Piccadilly Circus on November the 30th, 1994, waiting for the doors to open on a special midnight to 1:30 a.m. opening session. The store manager reported they'd sold 250 copies, which were incidentally priced at £19.99. It was a similar story at other record shops around the country when they opened the next day. Were you in one of those lines? If you were, do tell us your story in the comments. At the time of this album's release, vinyl was at one of its lowest points, and most copies purchased that day were on CD and cassette. I originally bought it on CD too, but until recently never noticed the printing error on the disc 2 track listing, where track 17 is listed as top, so how come no one loves me? The album hit number 1 in the UK for 1 week on December the 10th and number 3 on the US Billboard album chart. It sold 5 million copies in 6 weeks and an estimated 8 million worldwide during its first year, proving the public were still in love with the Beatles. The album was followed in March 1995 by a 4-track vinyl or CD EP called Baby It's You. This featured 3 tracks which had not been included on the original album: I'll Follow the Sun, Devil in Her Heart, and Boys. Although the newspapers proclaimed this album was a blow to the bootleggers, for many longtime fans it was too little, too late. In fact, the success of the album only increased demand for more BBC material, and the bootleggers duly obliged, with even more releases, including multiple CD sets. Aside from including an unreleased performance of Lend Me Your Comb on Anthology 1, Apple did nothing further with the BBC material until November 2013, when they released the Enhanced Edition. The cover lost its sepia tone, the crossfades were removed, and the sound quality was generally improved from remastering using newer technology. Also, as a result of re-editing, which meant deleting the crossfades, the album now included 3 extra tracks, but only one, the final one, From Us to You Closing, was musical. This remaster was overshadowed by On Air, Live at the BBC Volume 2, which was released on the same day, and followed a similar format. This time, the album came with personal approval from Paul, but failed to capture the public's imagination as much as Volume 1, and peaked at only number 12 in the UK on its first week of release. In an attempt to boost sales and clear stocks, both volumes were for a time available together in a double pack. In December that same year, an additional 44 BBC tracks were dumped by Apple on iTunes as part of a 59-track copyright extension release called Bootleg Recordings 1963. Being a download-only release was another green light to bootleggers, who satisfied collectors' demands by issuing it on CD and vinyl soon after. Both Live at the BBC volumes were repressed in 2017 as part of the Deagostini mail-order vinyl collection. These were pressed by MPO in France, and their covers are identifiable by their lack of a barcode on the rear panel. You can see a detailed video about this collection elsewhere on this channel. There are currently more than a dozen CDs and countless downloads worth of BBC material out there on the grey market, so there's plenty of scope for a 3rd official volume. But would it sell? Would you buy it? And what would you want to see included on it? Do let me and everyone else know in the comments. Now, I don't listen to this album as much as I did, but when I do, it always brings a massive smile to my face. Do feel free to leave your thoughts and memories of this album in the comments. I do read each and every one. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider supporting the channel by becoming a channel member, clicking the thanks button, or by subscribing. It really does help to keep all of this going. You may also have seen some shorts content on the channel recently, but don't worry, they're not going to replace these long-form videos. They're just a way of breathing life into older videos on the channel. I'll be back next week with more Beatles content, but it's all over for this one, so I'll say bye for now and thanks for watching.